from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay, warm weather has anglers angling for time on the water. We'll take you to fish camp in Louisiana. Plus, new crop insurance options for some hemp growers. A wet growing and harvest season could bring with it some long-term health risks.
Farmer's lung is a kind of an illness that doctors describe as a hypersensitivity pneumonitis.
Betsy Gibbon reports. And continued talk around a Chinese Phase 1 trade deal keeps markets optimistic for 2020.
AgDay, presented by the Chevy Silverado and the all-new Silverado HD, the strongest, most advanced family of Silverados ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping may in fact sign that Phase 1 trade agreement. The president making that comment during a recent press briefing at the White House. President Trump says the agreement is being translated and there will be a signing ceremony between the two leaders eventually, leaving the door open for a smaller, less formal signing in Washington between trade negotiators expected to happen in early January. President Trump telling military members during a video conference that it's been a big month for trade.
As you know, we're now getting along very well with China and trade. In fact, they just took tariffs off more than 800 products where they were charging us tariffs, and now those tariffs are gone. But we made a very big deal with China recently. We made a very big deal with Mexico, Canada, North Korea, Japan, a $40 billion deal with Japan, and we have plenty of others coming. It's going to have a tremendous boost in our country over the coming years, even over the coming year, but over the coming years, especially when they're fully kicked in. It's tremendous amounts of money.
Meanwhile, China also making comments on the deal, saying that two nations are in close contact. Markets taking that news to heart Thursday. Major grain spending much of the day in the green, while the Dow and other financial markets rallied on optimism around the agreement. Top ag trade negotiator at the USTR, Greg Dowd, says if this deal gets completed, it will mean big numbers for the next 2 years.
The purchase commitment on the part of China is based upon a base year of $24 billion of ag purchases, which occurred in 2017. What China has agreed to do is buy an additional $32 billion over the next 2 years on top of the $24 billion. So to make the math really easy, let's take 32 divided by 2 and add that 16 to the 24. That means on average, each of the next 2 years, China is committed to buy $40 billion in ag products. Now, in the first year, it'll be a little less. In the second year, it'll be a little more. But another very accurate way to describe this is China has committed to buying $80 billion in ag products over the next 2 years.
Dowd acknowledging critics, saying the climbing amount of Chinese purchases will be very hard to accomplish. However, he says with the structural changes in context, which have yet to been released, the transactions will be, quote, very doable. Dowd says the commitments only cover those first 2 years of the agreement. China has already restarted some purchases. In November, China's imports of soybeans from the U.S. surged to a 20-month high following the announcement of a trade deal. Soybean imports more than doubled the October pace and were the highest since March of 2018, when trade tensions were first starting to ratchet up. So far, China's total commitments this marketing year stand at 10.5 million tons. A year ago, it was only 2 million tons.
But another new high for March soybeans. What's been the driver there? In the past 24 days, we've rallied 67 cents.
A quick check of trade aid shows that as of this week, USDA's Farm Service Agency has paid more than $10.7 billion to farmers. The top 5 states to see these MFP 2.0 payments: Iowa, Illinois, Texas, Minnesota, and Kansas. Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue recently saying a possible third round of MFP payments may still happen after the first of the year. Despite concerns and understanding around the threat of African swine fever, the virus continues to spread. According to the World Health Organization, more than 50 countries have now reported the deadly virus in either wild or domestic pigs, 40 of those in the past 5 years. The National Pork Board says this broad geography shows how easily that virus can spread.
It's continuing to get worse and spreading not only in China, through much of East Asia, outside of Japan, parts of Russia, Eastern Europe. It's claimed over a third of the world's hogs already. It's just difficult to wrap our arms around that significance of that many hogs being lost. That's impacting the protein markets, and that's impacting the trade talks.
The recent spending bill included money to increase the number of agricultural inspectors at the nation's borders and ports of entry, an effort to help keep ASF out of the U.S. We'll discuss that and market impacts in more detail coming up in analysis. Records are being shattered temperature-wise in some areas of the country with that mild weather that's been occurring here late in December. Cindy Clausen has a look in Crop Comment. Cindy.
Yes, Clinton, here in northern Indiana, we broke a record yesterday. It'll be a little cooler today, though. Take a look at how things are shaping up, though. As we look at our map this morning, we are seeing some cooler temperatures. A cold front moved through northern Indiana in the overnight hours, and we'll see temperatures more so in the 40s today, but you could still see temperatures around 60 degrees in Cincinnati and getting up into central and even into northeastern Ohio, some extremely warm temperatures. We start to warm it up a little bit more again this weekend before it kind of starts to stay cold as we get into the early part of next week. Well, in South Dakota, it's still nice enough to be outside. That is for now. This picture is from Tom Rops. He is preg checking some cows in Lincoln County, South Dakota with family members during the holidays. He's glad to have checked them now before that snow arrives for the weekend. Stay tuned. I'm going to have your national forecast coming up. Clinton?
2019 has a reputation for being a wet year with flooding and late planting and harvesting. Sometimes those wet years can bring long-lasting health challenges. National reporter Betsy Gibbon explains.
We've all seen flooding in 2019, be it your own bin, community, or on social media. A wet year on the farm may cause big-term health issues like farmer's lung.
Farmer's lung is a kind of an illness that doctors describe as a hypersensitivity pneumonitis.
Put simply,
an allergic reaction in the lung that causes inflammation. And that's what farmer's lung is. In this case, it's triggered particularly by bacteria and by molds that are present most commonly in moldy hay.
Dr. Riley says the most common way to contract farmer's lung is to work with moldy hay, sometimes straw. Farmers may also get it by working and cleaning up in a closed space, like a grain bin, inhaling particles of mold.
The grain itself is not the problem. It's the bacteria and the fungi that grow along with the grain, and they can only thrive when there's moisture in the areas.
How long does it take for symptoms to occur? Do you realize initially, or could it potentially take years?
Well, there's an acute form of farmer's lung where people get symptoms within hours of their exposure. And it typically is a flu-like illness.
The American Lung Association says the flu-like symptoms with an acute form may be a dry cough, shortness of breath, chest tightness, fever, chills, or tiredness. It could potentially go away on its own.
But then with ongoing exposure, people can get what's called chronic farmer's lung. And that's actually very, very serious. In that case, the inflammation is ongoing and there's actually scarring that occurs in the lungs. And when that happens, the lungs can't do their job of providing oxygen to the body effectively.
Dr. Riley says chronic lung disease can impair farmers' ability to breathe and do normal activities. If it's progressive, people can get short of breath, which could lead to disability or a fatality.
If farmers think they may have been exposed to too much moldy, wet grain this year, what should they do?
They should seek medical attention promptly, because in addition to avoiding additional exposure, doctors have strong anti-inflammatory medications that we can give, which have really two benefits. They help people to feel better sooner, and they also help to prevent some of that scarring that can cause the real disability over long-term exposures.
Dr. Riley says it's always a good idea to wear a mask when dealing with wet, moldy hay or grain. Reporting for AgDay, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
When we come back, a closer look at the lingering impacts of African swine fever and some marketing perspective for 2020. And later, a winter warm-up may have you hankering to wet a line. But how's your fish ID IQ? We're off to identification boot camp later on AgDay. Our guest in the studio today is John Payne. He's the author of the Swine Times newsletter. And there's been quite a bit built up in the swine market in 2019. As we get into a new year, What things or what metrics are you going to continue to watch? Obviously, ASF has to be number one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the near-term story is bearish, just due to the fact we're producing so much. We have record amount of slaughter, and then you have high weights. So that turns into a lot of pork, and the product markets are hesitant to rally right now. The futures, though, I think you have to be very careful as far as what market we're talking about, because if you're talking about the short-term markets, I think there's a lot of support. Early summer markets like July and June, I think there's support. You start getting into the fall, and I'm not saying you need to rush out and hedge, but the market is, in our opinion, setting up to be very, very overvalued, especially given the amount of supplies we're going to have. I mean, the talk is from producers I work with up in like Northwest Iowa, Sioux City area, the feeder pig prices are just bottom of the barrel low because there's no place to put them. They're just trying to find anybody to take these animals they can, and that tells us supply is hefty. So if the Chinese aren't going to buy it, which right now they're projecting they are, I think we're, let's say set up to crash. That's not the wrong way I want to phrase it, but I think you have to be very careful here. If you get your summer run up and the fall contracts trade into the 80s, I think you got to be careful here.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've been expecting is that China would come in with a big buy, losing half their hog herd by some estimates. But their cold storage, they put a lot of pork in the freezer, and so we're still waiting on them to go through that supply. And when that exactly happens, I don't think we know. Right?
No, and we have it too. I mean, that's like I said, it's a very, very difficult dynamic because the summer run-up we're going to get. I mean, I think on the June contract as of today, we're about $12 cheaper than the summer high. So I got to think that we run into there sometime in Q2. But as far as the deferreds, and I think for us, like that's where the real value and what we can do on the board helps is trying to protect those folks, because again, we've been trading into the low 50s, high 40s the last couple of years, and we're sitting at 74 on the OCT. So you got to keep your eyes on those summer contracts. If you're going to buy hogs with anticipation of summer problems or a big demand spike, I think you got to pick the June, the July, and be very careful though. I think April's a soft month. I think October's a soft month.
Okay, well, something to watch. It's going to be dynamic. Appreciate it. Thanks. As always, thank you so much. We'll be back with more AgDay coming up in just a minute.
To find John's newsletter, This Week in Grain and Oilseeds, head over to www.thisweekingrain.com. AgDay, brought to you by Precision Planting, provider of practical and effective precision ag technologies to help make farmers smarter every season. Learn more at precisionplanting.com.
Meteorologist Cindy Clausen taking a look at our weather map. And Cindy, it has been very warm this week, but that's kind of changing or shifting a little bit here.
Yeah, I know, especially here in the Great Lakes area, we tend to see a warmer December and then boom, the calendar changes to January and the temperatures drop like a rock. And we are going to see a cool down as we get into the next week. Let's take a look though. The big weather maker is in the southwest today. You can see the Four Corners region already seeing some higher elevation snow and some rain. But out to the east, we're going to have just some slightly unsettled weather. We're going to have a low pressure system that continues to move into the northeast to look for some rain and maybe a touch of snow there as well. Now let's put this into motion. You can see how everything progresses. So New England getting some rain and snow. Here comes that low now starting to enter the plains. Look at the snow on the north side of that. And it could be piling up in parts of Nebraska and getting into South Dakota, parts of Kansas as well. High pressure settles into the Great Lakes, kind of keeps you dry for at least a little bit, but then this whole system is going to be coming your way as we get into the weekend. So watch as that low pressure system moves up further into the plain states. We have the snow on the northern and western side, but we have some fairly decent rain along that warm front as well. High pressure keeping things somewhat dry in the northwest, but we're going to see an increase in moisture there as well. Heading through our Saturday, that low starts to move into the upper Midwest, so look for that increase in rain as we get there, but still dropping the snow on the backside as you look at the Dakotas into Nebraska and into especially western Kansas as well. Let's look at that precipitation. Now, as the past 24 hours have been mostly in the far southwest and extreme northwest, but watch what happens as that low moves across the country. We're going to be seeing over an inch of moisture, and in some cases over 2 inches. This is from our model, especially through parts of the Central Plains. Now, looking at the snow variety of that, we're going to be seeing a lot of that in the high elevations in the Four Corners region, but look at that. Our model is showing 4 to 8 inches, and in some cases over 8 inches of snow in parts of the Central and Northern Plains. Now temperatures cooler on the backside of that front that moved through, so we're going to see slightly more seasonable air. It's been awfully warm, but we're still seeing those 50s and 60s even into parts of the northeast and mid-Atlantic states. Overnight we see those temperatures really starting to cool down. Got some teens there, still some really warm air though, 50 for an overnight low in St. Louis, yikes. And then as we look into tomorrow, we start to warm it up just a little bit again as we start to see that next system approaching. Quick check of the jet stream shows a cutoff low in the southwest. That's what's moving across the central part of the U.S. And you can see that trough now moving into Sunday over into the Great Lakes. So it looks like we're going to have a much more active weather pattern over the next week, with the second trough coming as we start to get in towards next weekend. That's your national forecast. Now let's check on the weather where you live. Cimarron, New Mexico, rain and snow for you today with a high of 40 degrees. Gothenburg, Nebraska, rain and snow showers with a high of 39. And East Jordan, Michigan, mostly cloudy and cooler with a high of 36 degrees.
There's a new insurance option for some hemp growers. We'll have the details coming up next. And later, grab a pole and hit the water while learning about fish may help improve the environment.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
Farmers are watching to see what's all included in that Phase 1 trade agreement with China so far. It's unknown whether hemp is included, but industry leaders say the crop has export potential. During a visit to Oregon, AgDay cameras were rolling when Chinese delegates visited a hemp farm and talked with growers in the state earlier this month. It was set up through Oregon State University.
The Chinese are interested in a trade market. You know, they've got a lot of people over there. They had a crop failure this year in their hemp, and they're looking for a market, and they see us as a potential exporter to them, and we're excited about that.
The U.S. Hemp Growers Association says the United States has been the largest importer of hemp, and the association hopes to have a larger domestic supply to replace some of those current imports. But China may also be a future market. USDA announcing this week it's rolling out federal crop insurance for hemp growers in 21 states. USDA's RMA pilot insurance program will cover the 2020 hemp crop in certain counties within the states shown here. This is the first federal crop insurance program to protect against yield losses in hemp grown for fiber, grain, or CBD. Previously, growers had little to no insurance. Hemp had to be rolled into the whole revenue of the farm under the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Coverage Program. Now, that option is still available and is in addition to this new pilot program. When we come back, we'll get fishy with our wildlife knowledge, see how knowing your fish might help improve water quality. Next in the picture.
AgDay, brought to you by Corvus Corn Herbicide from Bayer. Get an early season win against weeds with Corvus for end of season rewards.
This warm weather may have you hankering to get out and go fishing, but how many different fish types can you identify? Well, according to this report from the LSU Ag Center, being able to identify fish properly can lead to more sound conservation management decisions. Craig Gautreaux takes us to fish identification boot camp.
There were small fish and large fish, and there were freshwater and saltwater fish. But it was up to the attendees at a fish identification workshop to determine what was what. Being able to correctly identify fish in Louisiana is a challenge.
We've got a huge amount of diversity in freshwater fishes here in Louisiana. And then if you take the estuaries and our saltwater areas, we've got a ton of really cool diversity.
Fish from the same family can be difficult to distinguish, but if you know what to look for, it can be done accurately.
We're looking at fin position, fin shape, size, mouth positions, lateral lines, scale size. Most fish will have 3 to 5 traits you can look at to tell them apart from other similar fish.
Many of the participants work in public agencies charged with making conservation management decisions as part of their job. Others were instructors involved with teaching courses in fish ID.
So as much as I love, teaching other people about what makes these fish, it's also really useful for me as an instructor just to have a refresher every year.
Identifying fish was a focal point of the event, but studying fisheries involves much more.
You can study fish, sure, but it's also their surrounding environments, and it's water chemistry, and it's sedimentation and pollution, and there's just so many areas that encompass fisheries studies.
The workshop was conducted by members of the Louisiana chapter of the American Fisheries Society, and it allowed networking of agencies charged with caretaking Louisiana water bodies. With the LSU Ag Center, this is Craig Gautreaux reporting.
And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. Spend part of your day with us. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clint Griffiths. Have a great day.